So let's talk about Ghana. We have a population that's about 30 million, and then looking at mental disorder facilities or psychiatric hospitals, there are actually three, and two are in Accra and one is in the central region. And now we have 16 regions, and in those 16 regions, only 2 have psychiatric facilities. Don't you think that's very poor? Because to have a population that is that high and to have only 3 mental health facilities, don't you think that? One out of every 4 people suffer from mental health disorders. According to who, 460 million people are currently struggling with mental health issues. These acute figures and other related factors have led us to today's discussion on mental health disorders, as well as some other factors that we will consider during the discussion. I am not here alone. I'm here with my honorable panel, a beautiful lady and a fine gentleman. And as you always say, ladies first. So I'll let the woman start by introducing herself.
Hello, it's really nice to be here. My name is Audrey. I'm a writer, I'm a YouTuber, and I'm also a student at Ashesi University.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to be speaking here. My name is Jedidiah Blessing Kwarifa. I'm a teaching assistant and a researcher at the University of Ghana.
Today's discussion, I want us to look at mental health. When someone says he's mentally stable, or what does that mean?
Mental health is a really broad topic, and I think over here in Ghana, it's something that up until now there is not much attention being taken on that aspect. So when we say mental health, we are talking about one's psychological well-being, emotional well-being, and social well-being. Well-being in the sense that there are normal human interactions, and then how it's supposed to be in the norm. So we take a look at how people act, how we think, and then how we manage our stress and then other activities. That is in sum what mental health is about.
Now let's look at mental illness. Since now we know a little about mental health, let's look into mental illness. Now, most of the time, people see mental health or mental disorder as just someone that is mad. But what does it really entail? What is it really about? Audrey, please, can you enlighten us about mental illness?
So when we talk about mental illnesses or mental disorders, we're basically considering any disruption or disorder or imbalance with the wellness of one's mind. So in the same way that you might have a problem with another part of your body, you could equally have an issue with your brain. Maybe your brain doesn't function the way that it's supposed to. And this is not anything strange, but let's say, well, when we talk about, let's say, chemical imbalances in the brain, for example, your brain is supposed to produce certain feel-good chemicals so that you maybe feel happy or feel a certain type of emotion. So when you meet somebody that is, let's say, depressed, for example, they tell you that they're always feeling sad and down. It's mainly because their brain at that moment isn't producing those feel-good chemicals as they're supposed to, and that can easily be corrected. Mental disorders really shouldn't be mystified. It's the same way you can have a problem with any part of your body, you could equally have a problem with, let's say, the way that your mind works.
Okay, Audrey, thank you so much for your contribution. Jedidiah, Audrey spoke about the brain and chemicals, and can you enlighten us about that? Talk to us about the effect on the brain. And yeah,
that's quite an interesting question. So we do know that the body is made up of the nervous system, and this nervous system is responsible for the transmissions, signals, and then impulses, chemical and then electrical. So we have chemicals that are created for specific purposes. They are known as neurotransmitters. Let's say a neurotransmitter like dopamine has its own purpose. We have serotonin, we have norepinephrine. They all have their own purposes. So they are created by the body to satisfy that purpose. And then we have the effects of drugs that are artificial drugs like psychotic drugs. We have stimulant drugs. We have inhibitors, so depressant drugs. So these drugs have different effects on the brain. These drugs have different effects on the brain. And when it comes to mental disorders, so I would say psychotic drugs like marijuana has that effect on the human brain that at some point in time it could cause illusions and hallucinations. And hallucination is also a side effect or a symptom of a psychological disorder called schizophrenia. So as we move on, maybe we could get into details and know what actually affects or the extent of the effect these drugs cause. But in some drugs and then the chemicals have specific effects. The abundance of certain neurotransmitters will cause an effect, and then the inability of the body to produce those neurotransmitters also has its own effect. So there is supposed to be a careful balance between the production and then the use of this chemical, so that the normal human being will maintain an homeostatic equilibrium.
Let's look at some of the signs and symptoms of mental disorder. For example, a situation like or something like mood swings. Some people, it's normal. In fact, we are human beings. Sometimes we experience mood swings, and see some of something like aggressiveness. Once in a while, we get angry and all this kind of stuff. It's normal. So then, and if you look at some of the symptoms of depression, some of them might look normal. So how can you differentiate and say that, okay, now this is not good, this is not something that's normal, but this is depression? Audrey, please, can you talk to us about that?
Well, so we can call something a disorder if it's being done in excess. So like you had said, once in a while, we're all human beings, so once in a while you might have mood swings, once in a while you might feel down or sad, once in a while you might feel aggressive or irritable. But then you realize that it becomes a disorder when it's being done too much. For example, when somebody is depressed, you can tell if they're showing these symptoms too many times. So let's say you are feeling down more than half the time. Most of the time, you already know how you are. You know that maybe if you're sad, you're not so sad for a very long time. But then when you're depressed, you'd find that maybe you'd be having these negative thoughts or these low feelings for a very long time. Let's say you'd be having these low feelings all the time. Sometimes it might feel like it's for no reason for about a week or two, and you will definitely see that there has been a change in your lifestyle, because once you start to feel down, you start to have very low energy in your body. You realize that you're tired all the time. Either you can't sleep or you sleep too much. You are very sad. You start thinking about death and start thinking about really bad things all the time. That's when you begin to realize that there's something wrong and you need to get it checked.
Okay, so now if you realize that a child at home or your ward is experiencing some form of mental disorder or mental problems, as a parent, how do you go about it? What should you do? What steps should you take when you realize that from your ward? Jedidiah, please, can you help us?
So, to the layman, it's not really. It's kind of difficult to actually realize or get to know that this particular behavioral pattern is abnormal. But when you get to observe that maybe my ward has changed from his or her normal behavioral patterns, it seems that today he's very depressed and so down, or at one moment he's down and then at one moment he's at this different kind of behavioral pattern. And also some other stimulus or things that you're supposed to look at. And if you get to notice that the behavior of that ward is kind of different from how he behaves normally, then your first line of action is to see a specialist. Could be a psychiatrist or a psychotherapist. And then after diagnosis, they can be able to tell whether it is really a psychological disorder or a mental health disorder that you should take care of.
Another important thing I'd like to add is that parents play a very big role in it, because honestly, there can be people around you that are going through things and you wouldn't even know. And you wouldn't even know because of the type of relationship that they have with you. So I think parents should make sure that they establish a very good and trusting relationship with their children first. Because a lot of children might hide some things from their parents because they know that if they tell their parents might not take them seriously, or their parents might react in a certain way, or maybe not really attach importance to it as they'd like. So a lot of children might end up hiding these things. A child might not be comfortable to go and tell their dad or their mom that I'm feeling a certain way because of the fear that they have of what the parents might say. So it's important for parents to establish a good relationship with their children, like a friendship with their children, and also study their children and know the kind of personality the children have, such that if the child is acting out of line or acting in a certain way that's not typical to the way they actually are, the parents would know that, okay, this is what's going on with them. Or they should have a very good relationship such that the child will be able to easily come up to their mom or their dad and say, Mommy, Daddy, this is what I'm going through, so can you please help me? I feel like a lot of people hide these things from their parents because they are afraid of how their parents are going to react. And so I feel like there should be a very good bond to start with, and that might make things much better. And also, some people also go through these things because of how they are treated at home. Somebody might have some type of trauma, or might be depressed or going through certain situations, basically because of the things that are going on in their house. They might develop some type of trauma because of the way their parents treated them. Maybe their parents hate them, parents didn't really understand them. And once the child begins to feel like their parents don't love them or understand them, that's when they might be going through certain things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, well, that's a very serious point, because it's true. Most of the time, they don't want to tell mommy and daddy, because they know that when they tell mommy and daddy, they will either tell them to shut up or go and sit somewhere. They don't really pay too much attention to these things. Now, let's look at the causes. Let's look at some of the causes. Audrey has already talked about some about trauma. Now, let's look at some other causes, some other things that cause mental disorder. Jedidiah, please, can you talk about that?
We talk about causes of mental disorder, the underlying factors. We have genetic factors, we have environmental factors, and we have the interplay between the genetic and then the environmental factors. So both the environmental factors and then the genetic factors coming together to cause a mental disorder. It's more of the most prevalent we have. And then we also have environmental factors, family issues, like childhood abuse from the family side, or maybe let's say a child grows up being abused by one relative, whether sexual abusement or any form of abuse. It could go a long way to affect their mental health. So when it comes to the causes, it's very, how do I put it, it's broad. So we have the psychological factors. When we talk of genetics, we talk of the interplay of chemical imbalances in the brain. It all comes together to form the effects. So if we talk about drugs too, that's got to do with the biological side.
Okay, now let's look at depression. We have spoken about mental health, that's quite broad. Now let's limit our discussion to depression. Now, when someone says he's depressed, what does it mean to say I'm depressed? What does it mean, Audrey?
Okay. Well, I think we're narrowing down to depression because it's one of the most commonly heard about mental disorders, although there are so many. Well, if somebody is depressed, they would basically be feeling prolonged a prolonged sense of hopelessness, worthlessness. They be feeling very sad for very long periods of time. And like I had said earlier, there might be other symptoms that they might have, like they might be sleeping too much or not sleeping at all. They might be having certain repetitive negative thoughts. They could have suicidal thoughts. Not every depressed person might have not every depressed person would have suicidal thoughts, but then some depressed people have suicidal thoughts. They start to think about the worthlessness of life. They begin to feel tired all the time, and they generally stop having interest in a lot of things that they are typically interested about. So you'd find that somebody who's depressed might not be doing their hobbies anymore, or they might not be active at work anymore. They might not be able to put in a lot of energy into their schoolwork. So once you start to see that somebody is showing certain symptoms like this, then you know that they might be depressed.
Still on depression. Now, let's say, for example, I'm living in an environment with a lot of bad vibes around me. When I say bad vibes, I mean that the people around me, in fact, they are not people that you can seek advice from. And I mean, that kind of a position, very, very depressed, and then the environment too is not good enough. If you are someone like that, what do you do, or what do you have to do? Jedidiah, please, can you?
So when you realize that your circle is not giving you the right amount of energy or the right stuff to be able to cure or cope with that state, okay, when you realize that your circle is not going to give you that energy to cope with the depressive state, then your best option to do is to go and then seek help from a professional. Talking about your feelings in a way would help you gather the enough energy to evolve from one emotional state to the other. So when you come to make peace with whatever is happening, then what next? You start to think positive. So cognitive reconstruction, you think about the issue or what is causing depression, and then you try to find the positive aspect of it. Oh, although this happens, after all, I have life, so all hope is not lost yet. So what is the next step? I can do this, I can do that. Consider your options. Aside thinking positive, you can actually get enough rest. Getting enough rest seems to help in curing depression. You can also engage in physical activities like exercise, go for a jog one way or the other, like maybe your morning jog routines, physical exercises also helps in treating depression.
And we have spoken a lot about that, but let's look at someone who has just filled his wasi, and then we are telling him to do regular exercising and all this kind of stuff. In fact, at that point in time, it's very hard, because sometimes when you're in a position, you don't even think straight, even think about the positive side of life. So what should they do? Audrey, can you tell us more about that, please?
That's a hard one, because if somebody is going through something like that, it can be insensitive to tell them that, well, you're going through this thing, but just, go and take a jog, you'll be fine, because it's much more than that, right? And most of the time, even if you're trying to help somebody, you can't really help them until they're ready to be helped, you see. So if the person is not being receptive to the amount of help that you're giving them, it's still important for you to still stick around the person, right? So you've recognized that, okay, your friend is depressed because of this thing that happened. And then even if you continue to give them advice, they might not be taking it. But you still be around them, try and support them in ways that they can. And if you are the depressed person, I think that it's important for you to be patient with yourself, because it's not a situation that you can quickly jump out of or snap out of like people think it is. If you feel your wasi, like you said, it's a very long grief process, right? There are some moments where you'll be feeling really down, and I think it's important for you to feel those feelings out. And what he said about friends, I think it's important to have people around you that are going to support you in times like this, because it can be very, very difficult. And if you see that you are not in the right circle that can support you, like you said, you have to see a professional.
Yes, please. I want us to talk about this one too. The fact that I don't really know why, but if you have really noticed, when white children have a problem, it's very easy for them to tell their parents, oh mommy at school this happened, dad at school this happened. But for a black boy or black girl, when something happens to them, I don't know why they find it that hard to tell their parents. Like, why is it so? Is it, I don't know, is it that's how it is for Africa, that's how it is for the white man? Because it's very serious, and most of the time they hide it, and that's what leads to the suicide. Jedidiah, please, can you talk to us about it?
Sure. You see, society also has its own way of engineering our behavioral actions. So let's say in Ghana, there are certain things that you don't feel like I have to tell my parents because you're afraid that if I tell daddy about this, he's gonna be angry, and then after getting angry, I'm going to be punished. Or I don't feel okay opening up to daddy because growing up is not how we were brought up. Our society treats people differently from the white society where they are really open, parents are really open to kids. So in order for us to get that same vibe, we are supposed to actually make the children know that yes, I'm your father, I'm your mother, I'm here for you. You are not supposed to be scared of me. If anything is wrong with you, if you have any worries, I'm the one you're supposed to see. I'm the first point of contact. So if the child gets to know that my father is not maybe Van Damme or maybe any villain that would try to harm me when I go wayward, or when I have a problem, they are not going to shun me. They are only going to help me. So they find ways to help each other. So if my father is going to do that for me, then when I'm feeling down or when I have a problem, who do I go to? I go to my father, and then my father is going to help me. But mostly when this happens, when the children come to their father or their mother, and then they're like, so what should I do? Or it's shown that the response you give to the child is something that is going to push the child away. So if I come to you in the first place and then you tell me something that is not going to help me, then later on in life, I would not come to you for help because the first time I came, you showed me or you did something that even hurts me more. So an advice to parents and then young youths that are growing up to become parents is that when you start having children, the aura you create around yourself is supposed to be something that is enabling enough for the child to seek help when they need it. For the child to know that if I am in trouble, I can seek help from my father because they are there for me. That is why they were born, or that is why they came to this world. So it's not bad to seek for advice from my parents. They even know better since they've seen a lot of things that I'm not privy to. So they can help me in order to cope with these mechanisms.
Okay, so thanks for your contributions. Now let's move on to anxiety disorder.
And anxiety is a mental disorder characterized by irrational fears and then panic. And this mostly has an effect on the individual's day-to-day activity. So when you realize that the amount of fear that you are feeling or the extent to which you are feeling that emotion called fear, it's high enough that it's preventing you from your normal day-to-day function. That it's more of a disorder. A disorder is something that is not in line with your normal day-to-day activity, or is not in line with the order of the day, like the social norm or how a normal individual is supposed to be acting. So if we talk about anxiety disorders, we are talking about that irrational fear or that irrational feeling that causes people not to function the way they are supposed to function on a normal.
So what he said makes me think of something like a panic attack or an anxiety attack. So in a typical situation, let's say you've heard about something that's very worrisome. Somebody who doesn't have anxiety might go about it in a different way. Let's say you've seen that this thing is worrisome, you're worried about it for some time, and then that's it. But then somebody with anxiety might have a lot of thoughts about it at the same time. So they're having these repetitive thoughts about the same thing. They're having a lot of fear, like you said, they're having a lot of irrational fear, and then they start to think that the situation is going to harm them more than it actually would. So their bodies might start to make them react in maybe a fight or flight manner. So they might have, let's say, a panic attack or an anxiety attack where they feel like something is going to happen because of that bad situation, and they will be having shortness of breath, they'll be sweating so much, they'd have very low energy just because they're feeling a lot of fear about a certain situation. And most of the time they call it irrational, although I don't think that's the right word for it, but they call it irrational because most of the time that situation isn't actually going to harm you, but then at that point the person thinks that that particular situation is going to do something bad to them.
Yes, so talking about anxiety disorder and the fear and panic, let's a typical example is the situation we are in, coronavirus, and we got to a point we had to go on total lockdown. Everybody was at home, there was fear all over the place, everybody's wearing a mask, nobody's going out. Let's look at that situation. How do you handle such situation like that? Situation like coronavirus, you're at home, you are so afraid that you can get it, that maybe your dad who has gone home or your friend who is coming has the virus, you are so afraid, or there's a lot of fear in you at that time. How do you handle that, Jedidiah?
With something you are not used to, something you know nothing about, it's quite okay that you feel afraid of it. Like we get scared at the things we do not know. So first step is to actually take time to understand what COVID-19 is about, and that will be possible if we are able to get the right information. Talking about the right information, because there are certain kind of information that we receive on the media or other places that we look to for information about certain things, and then most of them are false, right? So getting the right information can help you put your body at a state that you get to normalize with the situation at hand. So if you get to know that, oh yes, there's a new epidemic or pandemic in the system, and then what does it do? It causes this, it causes that. How does one come into contact with it? When we do this, when we do that. So getting to know your way around it would actually release that form of anxiety that is more of deterring you from maybe conducting your own day-to-day activities. So if I know that if I go out without wearing a face mask, if I touch things and then I don't sanitize my hands, I don't wash my hands properly, I might contract virus. So we know that it is an airborne viral infection. So you're supposed to wear a mask. I wear my mask. Psychologically, I'm protecting myself. So I know that I have my mask on and I can go out and then feel okay. After wearing my mask, what's next? I wash my hands. So that is also assuring me that I am safe, thereby reducing your level of fear. So getting to know the problem at hand and how to go about it as a way of curing anxiety. And when it becomes so serious, so severe that you don't even want to step out because you think that if I step out, I'm gonna die. I'm going to be infected with corona, and thereby I'll die from corona. Then you will need help. That is why we have therapists. They are there to help you adjust to the norm.
I did my own research on this, on anxiety, and then I looked at the causes and I realized that most of it were about stress from work, stress from the house. Even though yes, fear is also a major aspect about it, but you can see that stress at work, in the house, and all those kinds of stress. Please, how can we also handle the issue of stress, Audrey?
Thank you. Well, when it comes to stress, a lot of people feel stress, especially from overloading themselves with work, overloading themselves with worry. And a lot of people maybe who are going to school or going to work or handling certain projects at a time, you'd find that they would be burnt out a lot of the time. So they wouldn't have like enough gas to move on. So they might start to feel really tired and very stressed out a lot of the time. And I think one way to really help you not be so stressed out is to make sure that you have enough rest. So, well, like they usually recommend, you have 8 hours of sleep, or whichever number of hours that is recommended for you. You have to make sure that you take time out for yourself to have a lot of leisure, because you find that people will always be piling themselves with a lot of work, and life is supposed to be about balance. If you're always working and always stressing yourself and not giving yourself breaks, you are going to get burnt out eventually. Your body is not your body is a machine that needs to be fueled at certain points in time. So you're supposed to make sure that even after you've worked, you're also supposed to take out some time for, in quotes, play, or take out some time for enough rest to do the things that you actually love to do. And those things are going to make sure that you feel good. Those things will make sure that you feel at peace and at rest, and you wouldn't have to worry about too many things. Because once you start to worry about lots of things, you start to have a lot of irrational fear and irrational thoughts about so many things at once, and that's what can lead you to having any type of anxiety episodes.
Now, let's move on to the spiritual aspects. Let's talk about spiritual health. Jedidiah, please enlighten us about spiritual health.
Spiritual health, what might say is the human wellness that transcends from all dimensions. So the spiritual dimension is what is going to link other dimensions, the physical, cognitive, mental, social domains, every dimension. So each aspect of our individual life comes together to contribute to our spiritual health. So if we have a good spiritual health, or our spiritual state as that's good enough, then we can have better life. It's more of there to control our normal day-to-day behavior.
Now, let's look at how our spiritual health affects our mental health. How do they link up? Audrey, please, can you talk to us about that?
So to help me answer this question, I think that it will be helpful for me to narrow it down. So let's take depression, for example. If somebody is depressed, you'd find that they have lost a lot of hope. They can't really find the meaning of life anymore, or they can't really discover, let's say, why they're on earth. And so, let's say people who are suicidal, for example, would want to kill themselves off because they don't really know their purpose in life. So some people are able to find peace and hope in having a spiritual life, and that helps some people go through any mental disorders that they might have, because developing a spiritual life helps you find peace and help in something that's outside of yourself, right? Because sometimes some people aren't able to find help from the people around them or from themselves, and so they tend to develop a spiritual life so that they can have help or peace from a higher power outside themselves. Do you understand what I'm saying? So people who are going through, let's say, depression, for example, you see that they're looking for so many answers. They're looking for their purpose in life. They're looking for a meaning in life. And a lot of people are able to find this through developing a spiritual life, for example, being a Christian. So they can find a very good community in the church. They can feel loved when they have a community in the church. And maybe through being a Christian or through developing a spiritual life, they're able to discover certain answers that they have always been looking for. And then they might have more hope in life.
The notion of spirituality, it's more pertinent that once we are discussing spirituality, we look at the effect of religion also on spirituality. So one's spiritual life, as my sister said here, is more linked to their religious belief. So my religious attribution or my religious association to a specific group or religious group, I should say it that way, is going to affect me in a way that we have morality, we have faith, and then every religious doctrine or a religious school of thought has their own way to deal with certain things. So when it comes to the Christendom, we have our Holy Bible, and then we have the teachings of maybe prophets, and then we have the words of our Messiah, and then these words are things that actually guide us in our walk in the Christian life. So we talk about morality. So how do we tell that this action is wrong or right? That all boils down to what is written in the book. This you shall not steal. Now I go to steal, and then after stealing, I now come to feel guilty. So that feeling of guilt is there. So how are we going to overcome the feeling of guilt? We tend to look back into our books. We tend to look back at our teachings. We are taught that, oh yes, we are sinners. And then that is why Christ came. So that though we are sinners, we might be saved. We may be saved if we believe in Christ. Right? So we having the assurance that since we have found Christ, there is no need to feel guilty because Christ has already paid for that crime. Christ has paid for the sin. It's enough Jews to push us through a depressive state. So we also come to the fact that things are not going well. So we are in turbulent times. But then I have faith, I have hope that since Christ is alive, since I am a child of God, then this and this is going to happen. It's always going to fall in plan. So we trust in, we believe in God's plan. And we do know that God has a plan for each and every individual. So getting to know that helps us to actually adapt and cope or build better coping mechanisms so that we can come out of that depressive state.
Thank you so much for your contribution. Now, let's look at what does the Bible have to say about mental health, Jedidiah?
That's an interesting question. But as Christians, we get to read our Bible, if not daily, if not daily, occasionally you get to read your Bible. And when you get to some points in the Bible, or should I say, there are points in the Bible that tells you not to fear. So if you are being assured not to fear because God is going to help you, that is a way that you can actually adapt to help yourself deal with anxiety. Say you facing a situation that brings a lot of fear, and then you remember that 2 Timothy chapter 1 verse 7 says that do not fear. Get it? So if that is it, then what am I going to do? I believe that my creator is telling me not to fear. So then why worry about what I can't control if my creator is telling me not to worry about it? He's going to help me go through that. So the Bible actually gives instances where we can rely to or we can fall back on when we are facing situations that it's going to threaten our mental health. So let's talk about anxiety. We can check for Philippians chapter 4 verse 6 and 7. It also talks about anxiety. And when we talk about healing, so healing, Matthew chapter 4 verse 24 also talks about how Jesus heals people with mental health conditions. So all these instances in the Bible is there to remind us that we have a creator, we have an all-powerful being, and then that's knowing that alone is supposed to help us. Knowing that alone is supposed to help us deal with depression, anxiety, and then many other mental health conditions.
Yes, so I think that it's also very helpful to be more practical about situations like this sometimes. For example, don't we think that the people that we read about in the Bible also went through certain things? Let's take Jesus Christ, for example. Look at the ordeal that Jesus Christ went through. Jesus Christ was a human being like the rest of us, meaning that certain pain that we would feel, he also felt. So in the same, he went through so many things. It wasn't just physical pain. You can imagine the type of emotional pain that he might have gone through as well, because there were people around him who didn't trust him, who didn't believe in him. So he might have been going through certain things as well. So I think that people can look at such a situation and maybe find hope in it. And I think that it's also important for the Christian community as well to approach issues of mental health with a better to a better perspective, right? Because I know of a lot of people, or we hear about a lot of people who end up falling off their spiritual journey or end up, let's say, leaving the church because of how the church might have treated their situation. And when somebody is going through something, they are having a battle in their mind. If somebody is also in a spiritual journey, it's their mind that they're using to focus on whichever like religion that they're in, you see. So it's like they're having a battle in the same place. So the church is supposed to be a very important place that people can get help from, but then unfortunately that isn't really the case, as we hear a lot of the time. A lot of people rather shy away from going to the church for help because they feel like people in the church might not take them seriously, or people in the church might attribute it to maybe a demon possession or something like that. So people don't want to go to the church for issues like this. But then people in the Christian community can do much better. I feel like as Christians are supposed to learn more about these things, so that if somebody approaches you with a situation like this, you don't just slap them with, oh, maybe it's because you are doing something wrong to offend God, that's why you are going through this thing. Christians should educate themselves more about these mental health issues, so that if somebody comes to them, they can give them the best advice. They can say that, okay, I'm going to pray for you, but then also make sure that they give them help that they need, because people just need other human beings to listen to them and support them. And people in the Christian community can do much better than that. There's different ways of that the church has counseling sessions for married people. They have so many other sessions, revivals and everything. But how many sessions do you hear where people are being counseled, or how many sessions do you hear about where people are being taught about these things? Where we could have sessions in the church where people are educated on mental health issues. We have sessions where people are helped. People who are going through emotional struggles are also helped, such that people who are going through things will be ready to come to the church and wouldn't shy away from the church every time they are going through something.
Okay, so that means from what you said, can we say that the church is not doing too well when it comes to mental disorder, or can we say that? Can we draw that conclusion?
That's not what I'm saying. I think that the church can do better.
Okay, so aside changing our attitude towards how we address mental health situations or issues when it comes to helping our members out, I think the next step is to actually get maybe a group of people in the church that are going to be equipped, in the sense that they get to know that they get the knowledge and then the know-how, or they are trained in a specific way, so that maybe we have a church counselor, which is not only going to be like a marriage counselor, because locally that's what we have here, marriage counselors here and there, but we don't have people we can go to when we have this mental conditions.
Thank you for your contribution. Now, I want us to look at this. Now, Ghana has a population that's about 30 million, and in fact, there are a lot of people in the country who are actually suffering from mental disorders, either bipolar, anxiety, depression, or any other form. And now, if you look at the hospitals we have, that's about 4 public hospitals, well known, as in the common ones. There are only about 4. Now, Jedidiah, what's your take on this?
The availability of these hospitals is more of a problem concerning the locations and then the amount of people that it can house at a particular point in time. So if you take maybe Accra Psychiatric Hospital, I can't speak to the facts of the data on how many people can be housed in that place, but then we have around 5. We have the Valley View Hospital. We have the Kolebu also treating psychological disorders and psychiatric disorders. We also have Pantine, and then we have Ankafo. But this is not enough. Moving forward, I think it is about time we took it up to ourselves as NGOs, as government organizations, to try and then make mental health accessible to all manner of people, from the guy who lives in the street to the politician up there. We are all supposed to have equal access to mental health. And one way to do that is to make sure that we have enough facilities to cater for these people. So if if the government is going to make sure that it puts measures in place to ensure that we get enough hospitals that are specialized in mental health treatments, and then we have NGOs also coming on board to make sure that these hospitals are equipped enough, they're available at every region, and then several hospitals in, maybe if you have close to 10 hospitals in a region that is specialized in mental health, I think it's going to help in the sense that we don't have to put pressure on the amenities over there, but then with the number of hospitals over there, we are able to help people because we can distribute the load within the hospitals. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your contributions. It has been a very fun, exciting, and well-educated discussion. Before we leave, do you have any final words you'd like to tell us, Audrey?
Thank you so much. It's been lovely being here. I think one last thing I'll just say is that every person might go through a situation at any point in time in their lives. It's nothing strange or nothing to be ashamed of. So we just have to make sure that we surround ourselves with the right people that we can talk to when we're going through something. And we also have to make sure that if we see another person going through something, we don't shame them about it. We have to make sure that we demystify mental health because it's a normal thing that most of us might have to go through at some point in time.
Sure. So to wrap up, my closing arguments would be the next step to getting the fact that mental health is really important. We've got to know that it is important that we all take good care of our mental health, because without mental health, then there's not going to be any normal human being. There's a saying that goes that there is no help without mental health. So the next step we can take is to create that awareness of mental health. Go to outreach, preach the gospel of mental health, and then we try to encourage people to first focus groups that engage in discussions that is geared towards helping people get over their mental health. If the situation requires that you go see a specialist, then the person should be referred to that. So we create these focus groups, and then we make sure that we equip the facilitators with the basics they need to know about mental health. So when it comes to the extent that they need to refer the individual to a specialist, we make sure that there is a funding, or there's a system that is supposed to help people. So let's say maybe people in the rural areas, and maybe they don't have the funding to seek access to mental health. So what do? We seek support from organizations, NGOs, and then the government as a whole, and then make sure that they are able to access this services that they require. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much for your time. Jedidiah and Audrey, thank you so much. For me, what I'll say is that love yourself, stay away from bad people, and know that God is the only answer. Yes, friends can help, but make sure you put God first in everything. And also, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. My name is Kojo Kwesen. You can call me Leroy, and this is the end of our discussion. Thank you. Leroy.